Hello comic fans, here's Earl Grey, and these are my shelves with European comics. Don't know why, but I've read much more of the European comics this year than I usually do. I guess you may have figured that out already by the amount of European stuff that I've been showing off recently. Anyway, it's always a bit unfortunate to show you beautiful books that are not available in your home country or haven't been translated into your language at all. So I figured that I do some overviews to get these European books out of my system in the most possible succinct way, in order to be able to focus more on English comics thereafter again. I said to focus more, not to focus exclusively, because there will be still a lot to talk about and to show in terms of European comics. Anyhow, my first top 10 are devoted to a genre that for some reasons is very typical for European comics, even though the background for all these stories is, as a matter of course, not European, but the North American Wild West. Here are 4 examples of comic series that haven't made it into my top 10. Claudio Nizzi's Fumetti series around this lonesome rider with his signature yellow shirt, tags drawn by different artists. That's a series I still don't have sunk my teeth deep enough to deliver a fair judgment. Same with Lester Cockney, written and drawn by Franz. Unfortunately, this is still my only album from that series, but that's a pretty good one, I've got to say. Homra is a comic series that was very, very poorly written by the German Peter Wichmann. Really, his storytelling is ridiculously bad, but the drawings of the Spanish artist Rafael Mendes are very good and precise. I really wonder why he hadn't stopped working with that writer sooner. And last but not least, Ringo by one of my favorite European comic artists, William Vance. Ringo is by far not his best series. I think he's better when he has a writer delivering a story for him, but Ringo is still a pretty enjoyable read. Maybe in general, the choice of a different background in terms of geography and in terms of time is a very European comic thing. There are a lot of comics escaping, so to speak, the daily squeeze in our little Europe, the limitedness, the highly populated cities, etc. For the vast spaces of the Wild West America of the 19th century or other more or less exotic, far away or simply out of reach places. In contrast, Wild West as a genre is limited in many ways. When you think of it, these stories only could have happened in a handful of decades on one particular continent, so even before you start a Wild West comic, a lot of the variables are already given. Plus there's an essential need to deliver realism in terms of atmosphere and art in general. This doesn't mean that these stories are realistic in terms of being close to the historic events. In fact, most of them aren't. And maybe Eve Swalwell's Durango is the best example, my rank 10 of my favorite European Wild West comic series. It's devoted to one cliché upright outlaw, if there ever was one, and you can be pretty sure there never was one like him. It's just a myth distorted through spaghetti westerns and stuff. An hero outside society who happens to be a sharpshooter with an impressive body count. As I said this comic clearly owes more to spaghetti western and Wild West B-movies than to any real events. But for me, that's a part of the appeal. Plus, it reads like buttered bread, a very easy, simple read with lots of over-the-top violence. If this has no appeal for you, well, probably then it won't do anything for you. But for a guy like me with some kind of distorted mind, it's always a fun ride. Much more on the realistic side is Cartland, on rank 9, about the trapper Jonathan Cartland, written by Laurence Harley, actually the only female writer in terms of this genre who comes to my mind right now, and drawn by one Michel Blanc-Dumont. His drawings are very clear and precise and are a very good choice to showcase the story of a trapper who walked the small path between the Native Americans and the settlers. He falls in love with a Native American and is sometimes a mediator between the both worlds, sometimes a defender of the Native Americans as well, and sometimes, of course, not accomplishing anything of it. Now on 8, we have a book that is easily available in English as well, and as you would have guessed, this is not the only thing that sets it apart from the other books in my list, for it's written by Alejandro Jodorowsky. So it bears a good amount of his signature craziness, especially because of its particular whacked-out personnel around the one-armed gunslinger Bouncer. All 7 albums are collected in this hardcover volume from Humanoids, unfortunately shrunken in comparison to the original European album format. But I believe there are other English editions in the original size, and the art of Francois Bouc deserves to be read in its original size. One of the greatest European comic artists for sure. On my rank 7, the craziness switches places. While in Bouncer, the artist book delivered the needed realism, so that the writer Jodorowsky could indulge in a whacked-out story, it's exactly the other way around in McCoy. Here it's the French writer Jean-Pierre Goumelin who takes care of a solid narrative backbone around the adventures of the ex-Confederate soldier McCoy and the historic facts around them to make them sort of believable, even if his storytelling is a bit clunky, wordy and old-fashioned. It still works pretty well as a counterpart to the totally out-there art of Antonio Hernandez Palacios. I can't even give you the slightest suggestion of what this artist is doing here. Millions of lines, zillions of details in almost each panel. Almost always overdoing everything. Especially facial expressions are often so overdramatic, like in the old silent movies. It's often a bit weird, to be honest, but delivers a certain dose of comic relief as well. And the colors. Man, the colors of Antonio Hernandez Palacios, done with crayons, markers, and whatever tool he could get his manic fingers on. It puts a lot of it, if not all of the computer-aided coloring today, to shame. On 6 we have Lucky Luke. Yes, you could see this coming, I could see this coming. Can we go on to rank 5? No, seriously, Lucky Luke had to be included in this list, and even if only for the reason that it was one of my first comics ever, and that I still know almost all the stories by heart. Written by the inventor of Asterix, Goscinny, and originally drawn by Morris, it's just a European classic, period. Which should tell you that we have reached the Olymp already in terms of European Wild West comics. And maybe one of the most influential comics in that regard was Jerry Spring, rank 5, written and drawn by Joseph Guillain, aka Gigé, who was for himself a very influential comic creator. He was an idol and a friend for Jean Giraud, aka Möbius, and for Claude Mézières, the artist behind Valerian and Laureline, and for a lot of other artists. And you can see why in these comics. His black and white art has an unbelievable fluidity. For an example, he could draw horses like no other. His stories around Jerry Spring and his Mexican friend Pancho are in fact a bit old school. From today's perspective, you get pretty familiar narratives that won't hold hardly any surprises for you. if you have read ever any Wild West comic. But remember, Jerry Spring was there before the rest of them. And still, these very precise and in a way modest and crisp stories are amongst the best of the genre. And the perfect presentation in these beautiful collected editions, perfect binding, perfect paper and so on, don't hurt my enjoyment neither. Which is of course true for this collected edition of Jim Cutlass as well, my rank 4. A wild western that slowly changes into a southern swamp saga with some mythological elements. The first issue was drawn by Jean Giraud, the subsequent ones by Christian Rossi, who did an excellent job. This comic series has quite an original story, a bit far from the well-trodden paths. In panellogy 193 you can see more of this collection and this book. Now to the bronze medal, and man, it took a while until I grabbed these books from the shelf in my comic shop. I don't know how often I looked, especially in this first volume, seeing the imperfections of the art and judging the whole series by it. But I've heard so much good stuff about Buddy Longway that I fortunately tried again and was rewarded big time. Buddy Longway is basically the story about a trapper and his family trying to survive in the wilderness. No bank robberies, no shootouts, nothing of that, just basic human issues, you know. And like his friend Kosei, the Swiss artist Derib is able to draw landscapes and sceneries that are just jaw-droppingly beautiful. Yeah, as you can see, his art style has improved tremendously and very quickly after the first album or so. A wonderful comic, 5 collected editions that I consider one of the high points of my whole collection. And in fact, the first 3 ranks in my top 10 could have been easily interchanged. So at one point I considered putting Buddy Longway on top, and at one point Comanche, which I eventually haven't, but it was at the very least a very strong contender for the first place. I love Herman, his sometimes harsh art and his uncompromising way of showing things like the way he thinks the things are, and in terms of the Wild West he comes closest to depicting the brutal reality of living in a time and place where crime and sickness ruled. Maybe the high point was the story in which the main hero, Red Dust, literally executes an unarmed villain, which was and is highly controversial, but yeah, Herman is at his best when he hits us at our most uncomfortable spot, if you know what I mean. And that much can I tell you, there will be more Herman in my upcoming lists. As there will be, of course, more Jean Giraud, and yes, you could see this coming, Blueberry is the best European Western comic, in my opinion. But as I said its first place has not been chiseled into stone as far as I'm concerned, because it's by no means a perfect series. In fact, the first albums show us a lot of the development of Jean Giraud as an artist, which is of course exciting, but yeah, I could see the disappointment one may feel picking up one of the first albums and expecting too much. And towards the end of Giraud's run, when he wrote the story as well, there's a lot of surprising clunkiness, too many characters, too many threads dangling in mid-air. It shows the importance of Jean-Michel Charlier, who wrote the series up to that point. For the most part, the comic Blueberry lives up to his legend, for sure. A wonderfully drawn and told Wild Western saga, pretty down-to-earth, hard-boiled, far from the freak-outs of Möbius. Almost restrained, but beautiful. Just look at these artist's editions sized books with the facsimilized black and white art from Möbius. I hope this is proof enough to show you that Blueberry owns indeed my first place in this first category of my favorite European comic series. Stay tuned, there's a lot more to come. Thanks for listening and watching. Goodbye.